We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. Our guest with us this morning, Davidson County District Attorney Glenn Funk, talking. It's good to have him on so soon after our gavel-to-gavel coverage of the Waffle House trial. As you know, Travis Reinking was convicted on all counts by the jury after about a 5-6 day trial and serving his life in prison without possibility of parole. I understand he's already been transferred from the Davidson County Jail to the state system and will be assigned somewhere.
Right.
Do you imagine he'll ever be in general population based on his mental illness? I know that's not your call.
Right. While I'm not a mental health expert, I would be surprised if he was put in general population at any point, right. Because he will probably need medication and continued treatment. Yeah. So that's what I think. But one of the reasons, once the jury imposes life without parole, then that part of the sentence is complete. And so if the judge goes ahead and signs that judgment, then he's not held locally for the next 2 months while we wait for the sentencing hearing.
Makes sense. I wonder on this front, we had several people asking about it. We all know the story of his situation up in Illinois, prior history of mental illness. After the incident at the White House, the Illinois authorities took away his guns, gave the guns, and correct me if I'm wrong on your understanding of this, at some point the guns were taken from him and given, instead of being held, they gave them to his family, his father. And at some point in the game, his father, as we understand it, returned the weapons to him, maybe once he moved down to Tennessee. And again, maybe it's more of an Illinois issue, but did you ever look at the possibility of charging his father with a crime? I understand there may be some charges maybe still pending. Where did things stand with his father, and how did you view the father's role in this?
Right. Well, obviously the person who's culpable, right, is Travis Reinking. But it is outrageous that his father would give him these guns back after he'd been court-ordered to surrender the guns. I mean, that's just terrible. And there are charges in another jurisdiction where the crime actually happened on that. But gun dispossession is a bigger problem than just this. I mean, I've been working with Diane Lance of the Office of Family Safety. I've been working with the judges to try to see what we could do to strengthen our gun dispossession laws. We've gone to the legislature and tried to get some stricter dispossession laws. Anybody who's convicted of a felony, anybody who's convicted of domestic violence, anybody who has, certain mental health findings, right, can no longer possess a weapon. We all have a Second Amendment right to possess a weapon, but certain people lose that right through some of their behaviors, committing a crime, whatever. The problem is, gun dispossession says, I need to give my gun up. Well, who's going to verify that I really gave my gun to someone else so that I don't have it, right? And what's the sanction if I lie and say, well, I gave it to somebody when I didn't really do it, or someone were even to say, yeah, he gave them to me, but then they give them back the next week? It's a real problem, because every time that somebody is supposed to dispossess a gun, oh, well, that's a family heirloom. Oh, this means a lot to me. Oh, well, maybe you just bought it 3 weeks ago. What do you mean it means that much to you? And if you give it to your family, what's really to keep them from giving it back to you, right? Where's the sanction there? And so there have been proposals, not just in our state, but in other states, to say, you know what, if you lose your right to bear arms, right, whatever guns you possess need to be given to the police department or to law enforcement to be destroyed, right? Well, yeah, but this gun was what my father used in World War II or my grandfather used in World War II. Well, there aren't a whole lot of World War II antiques running around, right? Or legitimate reasons. Well, this is what he shot his first deer with, and so he's, I need to find where this is the gun that he used to protect our family, whenever. We hear that, and people say, well, yeah, you're right. Let's not take that out of the family. Let's give it to a brother. Let's give it to a sister. Let's give it to your nephew. The problem is, though, oftentimes even dispossessed guns end up back in the hands of the people who have been dispossessed of those guns, who've been declared that they can no longer have weapons. And then too often it turns into a tragedy. So this is like a very stark example of that, and why our dispossession laws need to be strengthened.
And by the way, then, and I hear your point on that, as far as whether or not you could have brought charges against the father, that wasn't really an option for you here in Tennessee. Right. That's an Illinois thing. Right. Did you look at it?
Well, sure, we looked at it, but there was crime didn't happen here.
Gotcha. We've got a couple calls. Let's go to Ann. Ann, good morning. Hi, Ann.
Good morning. The victims of this crime were far more reaching than those that were
sure.
killed and wounded. It extended to those that were in the restaurant, to their families. And as I watched this trial, I watched the first responders. It impacted their families, it impacted their lives, and will always impact their lives. As I watched the trial, I realized I had worked with some of the victims that died. I knew some of the first responders on the scene, and I know I'm not the only one watching the trial that realized that I knew some of these people, and I didn't realize when that trial started. So I just wanted to say thank you for the conviction, because thousands of people were impacted by this crime. I cannot even begin to imagine the pain that those families are going through and will always go through. But I have and will always have empathy forever because of what that trial being aired had on me. So I will always be mindful, and anything that can be done to change our gun laws needs to be done. So I just wanted to say thank you for the trial, thank you for the coverage, and thank you to the DAs that worked on getting that conviction, because yes, a year later he was still drawing on styrofoam containers. Yes, he was still immortalizing his crimes. Yes, he had mental illness, but somebody that does what he did and immortalizes it year later with such... He knew moment by moment everything he did, and he remembered it with such clarity that an insane person could not have done.
Thank you, Ann.
Yeah, no, Ann's right. This crime impacted these families, but it extended much larger swaths of the population than just the families. In fact, I was at 92Q radio station, and they were telling us that Sharita Henderson had been working there in their promotions department. Yep. She was shot. She ended up having to endure 25 surgeries and could not come back to work for well over a year. And when she did, she couldn't have that particular job going forward, and so she essentially resigned from 92Q. I mean, but her work family still holds her close and cares about her. All these folks impacted so many lives, and the horror of this day, this night, 3:30 in the morning, impacted all of their friends, families, acquaintances. But I also think it struck a chord with the people of Nashville, right? I mean, we want to live in a safe town. We don't want to have to think, well, should I go out to a restaurant in Nashville, right? Well, we've had two mass shootings. We had the Burnett Chapel Church of Christ. Emmanuel Sampson was convicted, sentenced to life in prison without parole. Yep. Now we've had the Waffle House shooting, convicted, sentenced to prison without for life without parole. These are fortunately very rare, but the way to keep them rare is to have an aggressive prosecution, a successful prosecution, and then achieve that level of sentencing so that can deter anybody else that thinks that they need to have some sort of moment of grandeur.
You do, yeah, maybe, but you wonder how much of a deterrent that is. Certainly punishment and putting them away so it doesn't happen again with them, but if they're, Emmanuel Sampson and Travis Reinking, I think both knew what they were doing was wrong, but they were out there. I don't know if you can even reason with some of those people. Well,
yeah, it's kind of a holistic approach, right?
Oh, I
you
understand
want
what you're saying.
The incapacitation, and you want to deter those individuals.
Absolutely.
Well, life without parole does that. But you also want to make sure that we're sending a message, because we're very fortunate, right? I never think, is it safe to go out to a restaurant? Never. Yeah. None of my friends think, and I don't know people in Nashville. I don't think that's the way we behave as a city, right? Well, I don't want to get to a point like some cities in the country where you think, well, really, where am I going? What time is it?
Right.
And should I go to a Waffle House just because it's late at night? Right?
You don't want it
I
to be
want
that
us
way.
to continue
Right.
to have that sense of community in Nashville where we know that this is a safe city, and I want to continue to promote that.
Real quick as we go to the break too, you know, you talked about at one point, certainly I'm sure you had contact with the victims' families. You
Right.
discussed things with them. And with regard to whether or not you chose to seek the death penalty, I think philosophically you probably are against the death penalty. You have not sought that in any case, and that's fine. That's a separate issue. But you did mention after the trial that you had talked to some of them, and while some of them maybe would have been fine with you seeking it, some others indicated that not so much, which I would think maybe either they're against it or they don't like the idea of appeal after appeal after appeal. What's your thinking on that and how that went into your decision?
All right. Well, we really met with the families of all 4 of the folks that were killed, and the 2 people that were crippled and probably should have died, but for heroic measures by our first responders. Right? Joe Perez, Torian Sonderland, Aquila Da Silva, Tia Wagoner, DeEbony Gross, Sharita Henderson. Right? I mean, those were, you know, and then also Kayla Shaw, James Shaw Jr. Right? So the folks that were killed, the folks that were wounded, the folks that were crippled. And we met with all of their families, right? Because we wanted to hear from them. What sentence do you want for us to seek? And some of the families were, yeah, we want it's first-degree murder, and not only do we want first-degree murder conviction, we want the death penalty. But not all of them did, right? Some of them voiced, no, we want life without parole. Right? We want to make sure that he can never hurt anyone else, but we are not asking for the death penalty. Why? Well, some of them think that it's not right to kill, right? It's never right to kill. And you know what? I don't want to be like him because he's a killer and I'm not a killer. Right? I mean, there's some of that. It is also very difficult for families of victims who, when the person is sentenced to the death penalty, there's 20, 30 years of appeals, state court, federal court, back and forth. To some extent, the folks that have gotten the death penalty kind of have some tremendous support that is also kind of gut-wrenching for the victims' families. Not that you know, look, we're all people, right? We all deserve human dignity, right? And I understand why some people support folks even who have committed heinous crimes. But for families, sometimes what they want is closure. They don't ever want to think about this person again for the rest of their life, right? They want to know that this person has been put away and nothing else is going to happen, and they don't have to continue to drag themselves through the court process, because every time you go to court, right? Every time you go to a parole hearing, every time you have to relitigate some facet of this case, that's just re-victimizing these families.
That's awful. I remember as we go to break, Paul Reed playing games. He's on death row and says, "Oh, now I want to stop my appeals and go just so he can get his last meal," and then he changes his mind, and the poor family's there. It's awful. It's awful, heart-wrenching. That one just stands out in my mind. The way
Paul Reed was really and truly one of the worst in the whole country, and he happened to be doing this series of murders here in Nashville.
Yes,
and Roger Moore, who tried this case with us, was also part of the trial team on Paul Dennis Reed.
Yeah, it's been around a bit. That experience, along with the Terminator.
Right.
Tom Thurman. We'll take a break. We'll be back with more and more of your calls right after this.
This is a Storm 5